start talking about it. There's a lot of us not talking about money or not feeling comfortable enough to talk about money because of, again, a lot of the shame, a lot of the stigma that came with it. So having that normalization of the conversation around money is going to be helpful.
Welcome to the Money Skills for Therapists podcast, where we answer this question: how can therapists and health practitioners go from money shame and confusion to feeling calm and confident about their finances and get money really working for them in both their private practice and their lives? I'm your host, Linzy Bonham, therapist turned money coach and creator of the course Money Skills for Therapists. Hello, and welcome back to the Money Skills for Therapists podcast. Today's guest is Chioma Janelle Efejedia. Chioma is a therapist who works with folks in tech, people of color in tech. She is local to me. She's in Kitchener, Ontario. I'm in Guelph, Ontario, so just down the road. And I had the pleasure of meeting her in person at an event recently, and we got talking about the idea for this episode today. Today, Chioma and I talk about racialized folks and money. We talk about culture and ethnicity and its impact on people's money stories. We jam a little bit and brainstorm a little bit about systemic oppression and just being in a white Eurocentric culture, more individualistic, that impact of that on racialized people and their relationship with money. She talks about susu or partner, which is a collectivist model of finance. Lots of rich pieces here today. Here's my conversation with Chioma Janelle Efejedia. So Chioma, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me here.
I'm excited to have you here. I think you might be the first person that I've had on the podcast because we met in person and you were like, I want to be on your podcast and talk about this thing. And I was like, yes, absolutely. So it's exciting to, be having this conversation with you because I don't get to meet a lot of people in person working in the online space, but we're both in the Guelph, Kitchener, Waterloo area in Ontario.
Yeah, we are. And I think that's so cool to have like proximity to say, hey, you're on the online space. We can connect in person and we can also be virtual. I think that is.
Yeah, it's cool. Because I spoke at a local event for our OASW, Ontario Association of Social Workers. And then I remember you came up after and you were like, you are all over my Instagram, which is like always weird for me. But that's how Facebook advertising works. And you pitched this conversation day, which I'm really excited to have. So can you tell folks a little bit about yourself before we dig into it?
My name is Chioma Janelle Efejedia. I am the founder of Inner Compass Wellbeing, and I work a lot with culturally diversity. I work from a cultural relatable lens and responsive lens to make sure that the needs of racialized individuals are being met.
Great. And the topic that you suggested for today that I'm excited to start to dig into is racialization and money. Let's start with kind of the bigger zoom out. Like, how does culture and ethnicity and race impact people's money stories?
That's a great question. When it comes to our money stories, from our family of origin, we all pick up and we all basically have a relationship of how we've seen our parents, our grandparents, our culture deal with money. And, the status that we've put on money or the status that money plays in our lives, right? We all know that money can be a tool and a resource, but based on where our cultural backgrounds are, based on what the norms are around money and how we are using money, there's a story there. And when, I work with diverse people, when I work with Black people, when I work with South Asian community, they all have their money story. And I realized from an onset, even within my own personal experience, it's different. It's different from what like a Eurocentric money story might be. It's different from what the capitalistic ideology of money would look like. Not to say that influence doesn't play a role, it does, but that relationship changes based on what part of the continent or what part of the world you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there is this. It's getting me thinking also about history and place and time, where you're from, where your ancestors are from. Like there's very specific, there's culture, but there's also historical events that happen that are going to impact generations to come.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what are some specific examples of kind of like ethnicity and culture showing up in folks' money stories?
So, one of the ways that shows up is how people save money. So for the Black community, Jamaicans, Africans, they have this thing called partner or susu. And basically what it is, it's a community way of saving. So, Western society, it's big on credit, it's big on, debt and like leveraging that to be successful, especially as business owners. We might take out a loan to start our business. But, in a lot of other parts of the world, again, Jamaica, Nigeria, parts of Africa, they might say, okay, let's communal save, right? So you have
Mm,
a monthly contribution of like maybe it's $100, like equivalent to like $100 a month. So you have X amount, and then that's your seed money to get your thing going, right? And I think that communal lens of how we're saving and how we're using money is really important. But then also when you bring it into Canadian context and it becomes, credit, a lot of people don't trust credit, or a lot of, racialized people are like, I don't want to get into debt because that's not a part of their cultural story. That's not a part of the norm. So
mm,
being able to
mhm.
take on, credit debt or loans, especially as business owner, becomes scary, right? It becomes something that it's like, I wasn't taught to do that. Even talking from my own experience, I wasn't taught to do that. I was looked at like you need to make sure your debt is as clean as possible. Like don't get as much credit,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
I think that's important, but also realizing that sometimes when you're in Canada, you don't have that ability to have that communal sharing of money, right? So
Uh,
that's how it can look different.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that like partner or susu, like my systems brain is so curious now. Tell me more about what that model looks like. Like folks put in $100 a month, like say that's your contribution. And then how does the community determine who takes out money, how much money you take out? What does that look like?
So I do sushi all the time. I do it here too. So the way
Yeah.
how it looks like is what you put in is what you get out, right? So it's usually a
Yeah.
duration. So maybe there's 10 people that get together and they're each putting $100. So you'll have a list of when is your time. So maybe someone's like, I need this money right now. So then they'll get over, if it's over 10 weeks, 100 times 10, they'll get that amount and then it'll kind of just filter.
Mhm.
So whoever the last
Yes.
person might get the bulk amount, right? So
Right.
it just requires everybody to contribute and work together. And it really is based on an honor system, right? Because you do have to have that level of communal trust.
Yeah.
So that's the logistics of how like Susu, our partner, would work.
Right. So folks can get out what they put
Hmm.
in. So tell me then, this is my like super individualistic brain that's like, huh, but I don't get it. So tell me then the benefit of having everybody's money together. If folks are entitled to their own, like what is the real benefit of folks pooling their money together then?
One, you save faster if you have an
Yeah.
expense coming up quicker. So, for example, maybe in a month or like in 4 weeks, you're going to need a bulk of money and you're not going to have that for, let's say, it's going to take you longer to do it individually. You know that you can have
Okay.
this bulk money, right? You know, you can
Right.
have
Okay.
whatever that
I
dollar, like
see.
if that dollar amount is like 5,000, I'm doing bad math right now. So like it doesn't
Sure.
equate,
Yeah. Yeah.
but like say that bulk is
Just throw
5,000, you can
numbers.
have it sooner. And if you're like, okay, I
Hmm.
need to save for like a bigger expense, it's a way to just help you save and have that accountability, right? So
Yeah. Yes.
that's
Yes.
the benefit of
Yeah.
it.
So folks can get basically like an advance
Hmm.
is what you're saying?
Hmm.
Like you can get, $5,000 sooner, but you're committed to continue to put money in so the money will replenish and be there when somebody else needs money.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I am hearing there like a lot of trust, that would be between a group of people. Because something that I think about, even with more individualistic, like Western Eurocentric society, is sometimes even couples don't share money because there's this like fear that the other person could like spend all the money, right? And like take it away from you. And so that really is a much more trusting way to
Mhm.
be benefiting together. But yeah, there's a real community aspect there that sounds like it would be central to making that work.
And absolutely, and that's the part where when you look at the cultural and the ethnic differences, it's really based on the communal way of how money is used and shared versus the individualistic way,
Yeah.
right? You
Yes.
share the
Yes.
stats when it comes to how like the dollar circulates in different communities. So like in terms of the Black community, it might circle like once or
Mm,
twice. If you look at the South Asian community, I think it's a little bit more. I don't have the numbers for that. When you look at like the white
yeah.
community, it's like 20, it circles around 20 times before it leaves that community. So, there's that
Mm,
shift. There's that shift when you look at
right.
what that communal sense is and how we've historically dealt with money and spending versus, now you're in a Western world and it's individualistic and it's breaking away from some of those cultural norms that were beneficial, still are beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, because when you're not doing that, I think we have to put our trust instead in systems,
Yes.
right? Like we put our trust in insurance, which, for the Americans listening, who have to use insurance a lot. Like sometimes insurance is on your side and they do what they say what they're going to do, but sometimes they fight you to do the thing that they promised they were going to do because it's not people who care about you, right? It's a system that's based on profiting, right? And I think the same about like loans and banks. Like we end up instead having to trust these large systems, but they are for-profit systems. They are there to make money, and they don't really care the impact on you if you get in over your head, or they will even sell you things that maybe you can't afford because they know they're going to make more money off of you. So there's definitely a lot less of that like care and community in the individualistic model.
Absolutely. And even just, when you think about bank loans or like you think about redlining and historically how, Black communities have been marginalized from even having access to funding and access to opportunities. So,
Yes.
shifting from that individual lens for racialized individuals, for Black individuals like me, gives me a better opportunity to say, okay, now I have the money or I can have the resource to be able to get what I need to get done. Right. Especially because it is harder. It would be harder for myself as a Black woman to get a loan, versus yourself. Right. And that difference in
Absolutely.
terms of what it creates and the economic movement that it comes from. So, shifting to like the system level of how money is, racism and culture has such a huge impact. And when we're able to tap into like, how do we use communal ways of saving? How do we use structure to make sure that we're able to really build capital? There's actually a platform called Wevo now that kind of has that partner susu model of communal sharing. So, people are starting to say, okay, how do we go back to some of that narrative of communal sharing?
Yeah. Yeah. And the phrase that comes to mind for me, which might be a newer phrase or more of like kind of like a lefty activist phrase, is like mutual aid, right? Of like communities really supporting themselves. Are you familiar with the concept of mutual aid? Is that on your radar?
No, it's not.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure exactly of similarities or differences, but that mutual aid piece of there is that sense of this is like our community, like we care about each other, we trust each other. So we're going to pool money together so that folks can access money in this more collectivist, community oriented way. And now I'm going to have to like go out of here and do a bunch of research on these similarities or differences between those systems. But yeah, what I'm hearing is it's like you historically and presently can't trust these larger systems to take care of you, which on one hand, as for-profit systems, I think all of us can be screwed over by these large systems because they don't care about anybody, but they definitely don't care about marginalized folks. And there's all this systemic oppression baked into those systems, as you said, of like who can get a loan easily, right? And whose loan might be recalls faster than somebody else's. Like there's so much history there, which also makes me think about systemic oppression, right? Because we're talking the susu and partner is this cultural system, right? That exists in many places in the world. But I'm also thinking about when you come to a white supremacist culture, right? Like when you're in a context where it is this Eurocentric, white normative space, just to like jam on this a little bit, how do you think that impacts folks' money stories, right? Or how does that impact people coming into a white supremacist culture when it comes to money?
I think it creates a lot of stigma, right? It creates a lot of stigma around money. It creates a lot of scarcity around money. It creates a disconnect of money as a resource to money is something that I need to hold really tight on. Like you don't know how to work it as well. So that usually is I want to say the trauma impact when it comes to like the systematic racism that you see within institutions when it comes to money is when you have lack of, so it creates this story of scarcity or this holding on to say, my grandma used to say, you got to make every penny count. Right. And it was like saying you're holding on to it really tight though. Right. So it was, can you do without, or is this something that you need right now? So it was more of let's fund our needs. And if there is extra for our wants, that cool, we can get that. But rarely it's not because, access to that resource is harder. Even when it comes to, employment opportunities, you find that marginalized individuals are usually underemployed, right? They might have the education, they might have the background, and they're not. So then that money is tighter, right? And then you're not able to access it the same way. Canada, North America, it's expensive. Like it is expensive in this day and age.
Oh,
It's expensive to live.
yes.
So if you have an unexpected bill that comes up, it's not like you can turn to
Yeah.
the bank. I was talking to an adjudicator yesterday, actually, and
Okay.
she's like, the bank has so many rules in terms of people getting access to support, and the rules get harder based on who you are, right? Like you would think that it's all fair, but it's not. And
Mhm.
when it comes to that money story, those internalized systems that say, you know, we're not connected to you as a human being or recognizing what your need is
Mhm.
for right now, but we're going to say,
Mhm.
um, sorry, you don't have access to this, or you're taking out payday loans, which has higher interest rates, right? It builds a sense of mistrust. It builds this thing of, oh,
Yeah.
I'm getting screwed over by the system again, because the alternatives
Yes.
are not that great. But then when you go to that
Yeah.
communal sense, you're like, oh, okay, this is more supportive. Granted, as you were talking about the mutual aid, I think the difference between it is Susa and
Mhm.
Partner is a group of people collecting, right? So nobody outside of that group
Mhm.
is going to get that money. I think mutual aid is like
Mhm.
almost like a bucket. So like even if you were not a part of it, you can still access it. That's kind of what it sounded like.
Now I don't know. There's somebody listening right now who's like, that's not what mutual aid is. Yeah. Now I'm not sure. My sense
Yeah.
is that it is within a community that, folks would access and then they would be contributing back later.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll have to take a look and learn more about that model. But yeah, like I'm hearing a couple things are coming to mind as you're talking. Like, first of all, what you're talking with your grandmother of like, you got to hold on to the pennies. And I see this a lot with therapists too, just with the type of people we are. There can be this like real like clutching and like tightness in us as humans for lots of different reasons. But as you say, it's like if you can't access that resource more easily, if you can't easily access that resource, I always think about with money, there's two levers, right? We can either spend less or make more, right? And there's all sorts of complex pieces that go into that and some math and some strategy. But ultimately, at the end of the day, those are the two options we have. We either make more or spend less. So if you can't make more, if you don't live in a society that values you and gives you easy opportunity to get paid for your gifts, then what can you do? Like
Mhm.
you can spend less, right? That's where you have control. So of course you're going to exert control where you have it, which makes so much sense. And something that I see in racialized folks in money skills for therapists is also there can be this sense of just low self-worth, right? Like you haven't seen yourself represented growing up. Like you didn't grow up thinking that you could be the doctor or the president. And then you become this incredibly talented therapist. And suddenly you have to face the reality that maybe you need to charge $150 or $200 an hour, but you haven't been told that you are a valuable, smart, wonderful person by the larger society your whole life. Hopefully your parents and the folks who love you have been telling you that, but you are in an oppressive environment, which means that like it's a bigger step to get to that point of like, I am talented. I am giving worth. Like I can charge this fee because I'm changing people's lives. It's a much bigger step when you are racialized, is what I have observed. Does that ring true to you, or would you, trouble
So
that a bit?
so true. And I don't think
Yeah,
it's just in like, the world of therapists. I think it's across the board. I have
yeah,
been in so many different rooms with business people, entrepreneurs that are Black, where they're more willing to give their time for free or for a discounted
mm,
value versus saying, I am worth this amount and I'm going to charge
yeah,
accordingly. And
yes,
the price that we put on our service and our labor, again, from that system of, you always have gotten less. Black
mm,
bodies, in essence, have always been, in this grind culture of you need to produce, you need to keep going, and we're not going to compensate you. So, there's a
yeah,
level of like, this is just the norm. And breaking
yeah,
out of it to say, you are worthy. Like, no, that your labor, your gifts, your
mhm,
talent are deserving to be
mhm,
compensated. So you're breaking some of that,
yes,
that scarcity mindset or the relationship with money that I like to call it, because what it
mhm,
comes down to is how are you viewing that money, right? Like, are you viewing it
yeah,
as
yes,
just something that you need to survive or as a tool to say, you know what, it's going to give me the life that I need. It's going to make my kids, my generations happier, like more
mhm,
comfortable.
mhm,
And it is, again, that complete shift, right? So it's
yeah,
almost when
yeah,
I've seen it, when I've been working with racialized individuals, even for myself, it's almost a 360 mindset shift, right? It's
mm,
breaking up
yeah,
from the previous narratives, the previous stories with money. It's breaking up from what our parents might have seen money as, our grandparents might have seen money as. It's also going against a capitalist system, right? A depressive
Mhm.
system that has always, at the crux of it said, we don't actually value your worth. You're always going to be in a place where you're underemployed, you're not getting the resources that you need, and say, nope, I'm going to change that. And
Yeah.
honestly, being in a
Yeah.
space when you're changing and disturbing, when you're a disruptor, that in itself, that in itself
Yeah.
is hard,
Yes.
right? And
Oh, 100%.
it's hard, and it comes with a toll, right? So
Yeah.
it it
Yeah.
it's so much bigger than just, that money story plays such a huge role in it. But when you're looking at the layers that come to that money story, and like, taking a part of that layer like an onion to get to, that sweet part, right?
I know. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And something that, I feel for a few years on the podcast, I talked about this a lot because this was part of my own journey, but I'm thinking about it too as you're talking is like the grief that comes with that as you do start to say, like, no, I value myself. I'm going to step into this different place. Like, if the folks around you, if your family and friends like are still kind of living this other story and you're choosing a different story, as you say, I've personally experienced part of the complexity is like you're choosing to live differently than the folks that you love, right? And then you're disrupting. It makes me think about the image for like kind of the family therapy model, the family constellation system where everybody's on a mobile, and if you start to move, everybody shakes, like there's this disruption that happens to everybody. Yeah, you're really rocking the boat, and sometimes you're also challenging or imperiling relationships that are really important to you by choosing to live a different story than the one that has been inherited by your family and your community.
I do agree with the grief, but I think some of that money story is inherited not by choice, but necessarily just by design of the system. So what
Mhm.
I find
Mhm.
actually, like within my community, within a lot of racialized communities, when you're able to break that mold, people are cheering behind you. People are like they're rooting for your
Mm.
success,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna right now I'm gonna talk a lot about the Black community because I think that's
Yeah.
and the term Black excellence, right?
Mm.
We want you to break that narrative. You
Mhm.
have people who laid the groundwork for you to be successful, for you to have
Yes.
open opportunities. So
Yeah.
there's more of a part of there's a generation before us that wanted this, but they couldn't get access to it.
Right.
So now the shift
Yes.
is, how can we
Mm.
access it and feel worthy to
Yeah.
be in that, right? Like I always say it all the
Yeah.
time. I'm my ancestors' wildest dreams. I am their
Mhm.
wildest
Mhm.
dreams. Because
Totally.
they
Yeah.
wanted it. Did they have access to
Yes.
it? Did they have the resources for it? Were they able to connect to it? No, right? Because of,
Yeah.
again, that systematic barrier, that limitation that had placed on their income, their value,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
while you have, a community being like, yes, break these chains, like, feel
Yeah.
empowered, like do this, it still is a lonely journey. Like it still is a very isolating to be like, okay, now I'm the first one. I have an expectation and I have, almost the burden of carrying the weight of my ancestors or the people that laid the
Mhm.
foundation.
Yeah.
And that's heavy,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I think it's less about that grief, but more
Yeah.
about it's almost the opposite. It's almost like a celebration, right? It's
Mhm.
a celebration
Mhm.
that you're there. But in that
Yeah.
impact, because again, it is a lonely journey, it's an isolating journey. You might be the only one setting the ground, setting the stage. And now it's like, oh, okay, can I do this? Am I doing this?
Mhm.
What other roadblocks or hurdles are going to come? And
Yeah.
there's that fight, right? I
Yes.
wish I could
Absolutely.
say it doesn't come without a fight. It doesn't come
Yeah,
without,
yeah.
I wish I could say like it's maybe you're taking down another layer of a brick or a roadblock or a stumbling block that's there. You're like, ouch, I stepped on that. I didn't even know that existed or
Mhm.
was there
Right.
because
Yes.
nobody was in front of you. Nobody was setting that
Yeah.
pace.
Yeah.
I think about the image of, equity where
Mhm.
they're having that race and you can
Mm.
see that when you have it lined up with all the different races, and you can see that for Black individuals, our start is really just starting, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
there's no clue what's ahead, like no clue what's in
Yes.
front. And
Yeah.
that is scary. So so that
Yeah.
so so you know, you're going along this journey and you're rewriting your money story, right? You're
Hmm. Hmm.
rewriting, you know, the relationship with it. You're accessing more resources, you're asking more support, and you're still like, I don't know. I don't know what's
Yes.
happening. There's uncertainty.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And like I'm really happy that's your experience. Like, cause like it's interesting. Now I'm thinking like, right. So how much of my own experience of that is about being a white woman, a straight woman, and being policed by other women who are like, no, 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 like there's certain rules here. And like this is getting my wheels turning now about my culture that I'm talking about, right? Of like the grief that has been dominant for me. But what I'm hearing from you is something that I have experienced and talked with folks about a lot is like you do end up having to find like new people,
Mm.
right? Like your people. And the beautiful thing about the online space is sometimes through being online, you might find your person who's in like Massachusetts, who like, you know, you have so much in common in this incredible story to be able to be like, hey, I just tripped over this brick. You should know that it's there. So at least you're walking hand in hand in that journey because yeah, like I'm hearing, yeah, being out ahead is lonely. Yeah, as you say, there isn't that guide. There isn't that parent to be like, oh, this is what's coming next in this process because you're out ahead of them. And when you were talking about Black excellence and, you know, being your ancestors' wildest dreams, it also made me think of, you know, standing on the shoulder of giants, right? Like just all the foundational work that was done by these previous generations to get as far as things have gotten, which is not far enough. But yeah, there's a sense of connection that I'm hearing here when you're talking about that. That sounds very, very strong and very powerful.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know, I like that we're the online community, and I think a part of that, a part of, you know, tapping into culture, ethnicity is going back to collective and community, right?
Yeah.
You know, I always say there's so much power in the community. There's so much power in collective. So I'm less of an
Mhm.
individualistic person and more of how do I
Yeah.
work or how do I find my people? Because
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, I can't tell how many times where I've been like, I need a phone call from somebody, from a friend who gets it, who understands the day
Mhm.
in struggles,
Mhm.
the fluctuations with, am I gonna meet my money mark this month?
Yes.
What else do I
Totally.
need to be doing or am I missing? And it's been
Yeah.
that community that has reminded me of my worth. My, you know, I am
Mhm.
here for a reason. There is value in what I'm doing. You know, I'm going to charge what I'm deserved. I'm even thinking of I had a conversation. I love stories, by the way. I had a conversation with a gentleman a few weeks ago, and he was telling me how he got his first organization. And I said, "Okay, what did you
Mm.
charge for that?" And he's like, "I charged very, very low." And I was like, "Yeah." When he told me the number, I'm not going to share it, but when he told me the number,
Yeah.
it was maybe a quarter. No, I'd say less than a quarter.
Mhm.
Maybe one fourth of what people
Yes.
usually charge when working with organizations. And I was like,
Right.
you undersold yourself. I was like, who are you talking to? He's like, I didn't
Right.
have anyone to talk to about this. And I was like,
Yes.
I wish
Yes.
I had known you before because I would have been like,
Yeah,
no,
totally.
like, but again, how we're charging, we'll have, you know, as Black individuals, we'll be in spaces with businesses. People will be coming to us and will be underselling our value, underselling
Mhm.
our worth, right? And it's just
Yeah.
in those simple ways that we do that feel so innocently. We're like, oh my goodness, someone's going to pay this amount and you're worth
Yeah.
that and more.
Mhm. Mhm. So, what are some tips and tricks for racialized folks to rewrite their money stories and their relationship with money?
First, start talking about it. There's a lot of us not talking about money or not feeling comfortable enough to talk about money because of, again, a lot of the shame, a lot of the stigma that came with it. So, having that normalization of the conversation around money is going to be helpful. Second, finding community. I can't tell you how blessed it has been for me to find community, to find people that I can connect with and understand, you know, they've walked the road ahead of me, right? And
Mhm.
then also knowing that you are worthy and you are valued. I think that that last bit is something that is so important is recognizing that I'm worth this. I'm here for a reason. This gift is something that, you know, I can appreciate and other people will see that worth.
Mhm. Wonderful. Chioma, if folks want to learn more about you, actually, that's a question. Do you have offerings for other therapists and practitioners right now? Are you doing one-on-one? What do you have going on?
So I don't have offerings for other therapists and practitioners. I
Mhm.
mainly just work with individual clients and organizations at this time. Who knows what the future will have in store? But
Seriously, yes.
yeah, I don't know what the future will have. If somebody wants to find me, they can find me on my Instagram at innercompass_wellbeing. So that's where somebody can follow me. And then I'm on LinkedIn, Chioma Efejedia.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
No worries. Thank you. It's been an honor to hold space with you. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I so appreciated Chioma coming on the podcast today and, starting to unpack this topic, sharing about it. I was saying to her afterwards, she really should have offerings for therapists. So if you feel similarly, if you're like, oh, this person has some great things to say for those of us in the therapy space, definitely follow her on Instagram. Keep an eye on her. She was mentioning to me she's only 2 months into private practice, so she's busy with that. But I could see great things coming from her in the future. Afterwards, we also chatted a bit about all these other things we could have talked about, like the deprofessionalization of people when they immigrate to Canada, people who are doctors and just like lose their status automatically when they come here, end up driving Ubers, and like what that's going to do to your money stories and the financial impact of that. There's so many pieces to this. I really appreciate Chioma coming on the podcast today. You can follow me on Instagram at Money Nuts and Bolts. And if you're enjoying the podcast, I'm going to ask you to leave a review. I've been asking you to tell family and friends, but let's mix it up a little bit. If you can head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review, maybe share about which episodes you particularly enjoyed, what you like about the podcast. That is a great way for other therapists to find us and to be part of these conversations. Thanks for joining me today.